unpacking today's headlines. This is Souls and Liberty in Depth.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to In Depth, the production of Souls and Liberty. 88 days to go until the big day, November 5th, the day of the most consequential election in American history. I'm your host, Stephen Wynn, and joining me today is our political expert, Jim Ellis. Jim, how are you doing?
Great, Stephen. Good to see you again.
Good to see you as well. So first question that we want to look at today, what is the importance of the Catholic vote in this election?
You know, it really could be a critically defining factor because the Catholic vote is sometimes underrepresented in terms of voter turnout. And in fact, we saw a very interesting poll earlier in the year that the Pew Research Center does. They do an annual poll. It's very heavily sampled all across the country, and it's extremely in-depth, and they do this every year. And what it showed on Catholics, there was a big difference between the Anglo, if you will, or white Catholic and the Hispanic Catholic in terms of voter participation and in terms of how they view the issue. And it was really kind of stunning. And if you also look, and even more stunning was if you compared the Hispanic evangelicals to the Hispanic Catholics, big difference. Big difference. The Hispanic Catholics were less participatory and more liberal. And there was really no reason for that, except there needs to be better education within the Catholic community as to exactly how these issues affect not only Catholicism, but everyday life. So doing more work in that regard in the next 88 days, that could be a determinative factor because so many of the swing states, the Catholic population is huge. You know, the Catholic population is the plurality religion in 36 states. So it could be a huge factor if Catholics would vote as some other groups do, that in a homogeneous fashion. Now, we don't, but if there was more concentration on education and the Catholic principles, I think we'd see an uptick in that, and that would affect the outcome of the elections.
Right. Yeah, it's incredible, really. You think if there are almost 70 million U.S. Catholics, if we voted consistently as a bloc with what the church teaches, we would be able to turn this country around pretty quickly, I think. You mentioned swing states, et cetera.
Yes.
I want to touch on that a little bit more. When it comes to the battleground states, the Catholic vote is actually a little higher percentage of the total vote in almost every state. This could be pretty significant come November. Why do you think that we always see such pussyfooting around by the U.S. bishops? For example, when they publish their annual Forming Faithful Consciences, for example.
Well, it's just something that has been going on for decades, really, that the bishops, the appointed bishops, tend to be liberals. And they certainly exercise their liberal beliefs when they get into these positions. And we've seen that over and over and over. Now, fortunately, they don't really attempt to enforce that as much as you might guess. So that's been at least some positive. But yeah, coming out with some of the statements they do certainly doesn't help bind Catholics together to vote in a homogeneous fashion, which would be a benefit electorally. Now, if you want to talk about the battleground states, I mean, there's some critical ones in terms of how many Catholics could make a difference there. For example, New Mexico is of those swing states or battleground states. And New Mexico is becoming one of those. And that's largely due to the fact that that's a plurality Hispanic state. And Republicans are beginning to do a lot better with Hispanics. All of a sudden, a state like New Mexico now, polling consistently, is showing that while the Democrats still lead, the states are definitely in play, that state. And that actually is the top Catholic state of the battleground, if you count them as a battleground, and I do now, with 34% of the whole population is Catholic. So the Catholic vote in New Mexico could be critical in terms of trying to flip that state over to the Republicans. And it's got an even more central role in this presidential race, because if Trump can take and he has to win. And up until the Harris situation, he was way ahead in these states, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. Now he's still up or down by a point or two. It's virtually a tie in Arizona and Nevada. I think he's still a little bit ahead in Georgia. But at the end of the day, he's got to win all three of those. So if he wins Arizona, Nevada, and Georgia, that accounts for 33 electoral votes. He needs 35 to win. And the reason those three, I think, are the most important states to watch, because they set up the rest of the map. And if he were to take all three of those, plus all 25 states he's won twice, Trump would then only need one extra state anywhere, and he would win. And the interesting part about New Mexico, it's only got 5 electoral votes, but it's enough to put him over the top. So if he had a coalition of Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico, he wins without taking one of those critical Great Lakes states that the media concentrates on, those three being Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. There's a way, and New Mexico's the key to that, where Trump wins even if he were to lose all three of those, and he's very much in the game in all three of those states. So from that perspective, it's encouraging to see that there are more than just one avenue for Trump to win. In fact, the Trump campaign claims they've got 22 different avenues. Now, I have not investigated how they get to 22, but they've at least got 5 or 6 now that they didn't have before. And and if again Trump could motivate those voters, and Catholic communities in those states are large. Again, New Mexico, 34%, the number one plurality religion. If they could then turn that into extra votes, and Trump wins, all of a sudden, they've made a big difference in electing a president.
Right. Man, I hope it happens. I really, really do. Catholics need to get on board and vote according to the precepts of the faith. Now, let's look at another state where that certainly doesn't seem to be happening. Minnesota. The Minnesota Catholic Conference just came out with a statement praising Governor Tim Walz, despite his extremely problematic record on issues impacting children, abortion, transitioning without parents' knowledge, tampons in boys' restrooms, porn in public school libraries. So I was maybe not surprised, but I was at the same time shocked by the statement there. Do you think it's amazing? What are your thoughts on the fact that these radical bishops of the 1970s and 80s, it had such a long-lasting impact, despite the fact that really most, if not all, are gone from the scene now, but their shadow remains.
Yes, and and their successors certainly take up that as well. As we saw, the Minnesota bishops came out in favor of Walz and praised how great he was. But really, abortion on demand until even the time of birth, and now they're going to go beyond birth eventually here. Like Governor Northam here in Virginia, where I live, made that statement. After 2 or 3 days, we can determine if the baby should live or not. That's where they're headed. And exactly where do they stop? And Walz is going to be on board clearly with all of that. He's for late-term abortion, no parental consent. And then I think it's, from what I can see, it's the most transgender-friendly state in the whole country. It declared itself, thanks to Walz, as a transgender sanctuary state. That if transgender people from other states that were being persecuted, they could come to Minnesota and find a home there. And, that's another situation where he was all in favor of the education establishment, convincing these kids to change their gender when they're 12 years old and not telling the parents. There would be no legal right for a parent to even know that was going on. And Walz is behind all of that, and a leader, probably the biggest leader in the country on the transgender issue. So, and that's where the bishops are. There's got to be some rethinking going on within the Catholic Church to affect how the Catholic establishment views these types of issues and tries to get them back in line with Catholic social teaching.
Yeah, absolutely. It's scandalous. It really is just appalling. The statement that they released. You know, Pope Francis obviously has a lot of critics among more conservative Catholics, but he's been quite vocal about gender ideology and the push of gender ideology worldwide. You know, calling it ideological colonization. And so, uh,
Yeah.
you know, even he has been
Even yeah.
yeah, yeah. So for what's coming out of Minnesota, it's I don't know, it's wild. Are there any polls, any recent polls, showing how Trump is doing among Catholics now that Kamala has kicked Biden to the curb? You know, Trump was up by around 12 points among Catholics overall, maybe 6 weeks ago or so. Any new numbers regarding that?
You know, I haven't really seen any yet on that, the demographics yet or the segmentations. It's all really sort of fluctuating now and beginning to gel. I think we'll see after Labor Day is when we need to really kind of begin to see how things are shaking up. So if you look at some of these states now, it's where Trump was ahead by a few votes, and he was never really that far ahead in any place, even against Biden. That's what surprised me with their effort to remove Biden. Because if you actually just looked at the numbers at the time, they weren't that bad for him. But the overreaction from that debate and the Democrats themselves keeping that topic and that subject alive for as long as they did by every day some new office holder coming out and saying Biden should step down, that was astonishing to me because normally they don't do that sort of thing. And I think they were basing that on what they thought was going to happen in the election, not on the data at the time. And I think that's where we are right now. So these polls, they're basically a tie. You know, they talk, oh, the Harris, you know, jump, the Harris moving forward, and oh, she's just on a trajectory here. The best she's doing is a tie. And so as long as Trump rebounds, and I think he has been kind of in the doldrums lately, but they get back on message, I think they will, and drive home her record, that a lot of this changes. And again, the Catholic vote has to be a big part of that. But I'm curious to see what some of the numbers look like. My guess is that lead that Trump had among Catholics, you mentioned 12%, is probably a lot less today because there's a euphoria around Harris and the Democrats have all united behind her. When they see the real Kamala Harris, I think those numbers start to go back towards Trump. And the good news, if that's the case, they don't have to go very far for him to come back and win these states. Again, it's got to be Arizona, Georgia, Nevada first, and then we look at any other state, any other one. If he can just do that, he wins. And the pressure then goes extremely on the back of Harris if Trump can come through in Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada, because then she has to run the table. Stephen, she cannot lose another state that's a battleground state at that point. That means she has to sweep the whole Great Lakes, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And she's up in some polls, she's up one, in other polls, she's down one. So there's no guarantee for either of them in those three states, but she would be forced then to sweep those and sweep some of the marginal states like New Mexico that we're talking about. So, and then that really, they have a huge, influx of money since she's been the presumptive and now the official nominee with their virtual vote. But then they'd have to spend it in many, many places because Trump has done a good job of being able to expand the map and put some more of these states in play. And that's important, too, towards winning.
Okay, right. Well, roughly 40% of Catholics, U.S. Catholics, are Hispanic. And as you've talked about, it's higher in states like Arizona and New Mexico. What is Team Trump doing to really capture that vote? Because, as you say, it's going to be pivotal in November, not just for those states, but for the entire country.
Yeah, it sure is. I'm not totally aware of their plan for the segmentation, the coalitions. But I don't think there's any doubt from what I've observed and what I've read that the Democrats do have the advantage on the ground in turnout operations. And I think that's got to improve. I think that read at one point that Trump was turning the whole turnout operation over to Charlie Kirk's operation. And then Kirk later said that, he had nothing to do with any of that. So if that's what they're trying to do, then they're behind. And that's not a good thing to be in terms of voter turnout. Voter turnout is critically important. That's going to determine the outcome of this. And I think they had the advantage when Biden was the nominee, because I think a lot of Democrats just wouldn't have voted because they didn't want to vote for Biden, but they didn't want to vote for Trump either. But now that's changing to a degree. And that's the importance of getting back on the message and defining her as to what she is. A far, far left and rather incompetent office holder. But particularly her radical beliefs. I mean, even the nonpartisan organizations rated her as the most liberal senator when she was in the Senate, more liberal than Bernie Sanders. And that message needs to come out. The extreme positions that she holds, positions like, and she's changed them all. And Stephen, I'm wondering, and we will have never seen anything like this before, but can you build a winning campaign around lies? And frankly, that's what they're doing here, because let's look at the things that Kamala Harris believes, at least she said she did years ago or in the recent past, and what she's saying now after changing her positions. Let's start with the Biden cover-up. Clearly, they're all guilty of this. They all had to see that Biden was not up to speed, that he was not capable of moving forward. They sure saw it after the debate. And then when they realized, he may lose and this will affect us, then they took some action on it. But before that, they were more than willing to cover that up and let Biden try to muddle through the campaign, and then they drag him across the finish line. That was, they thought, was their best option because they didn't have a lot of confidence in Harris. Remember that. So dragging Biden over the line was what they originally thought was their best strategy. Then the debate happened, and it became clear to the whole country what shape he was in. Excuse me. And so now we see them having to go to Harris. This is the reason you don't see her before the media. This is the reason she really doesn't want to debate Trump. And this is the reason why she won't do any news conferences where she has to ask a question that's not scripted. And so far, it's all gone very well for them because she's stayed on the script with a teleprompter. But once she has to come off of that, that's going to be a different story. So let's look at the list of positions that they've already changed for Kamala Harris since she became the presumptive and now official nominee. Obviously, the Biden cover-up. Fracking. She was ardently opposed to fracking. And this is a big issue in Western Pennsylvania because Western Pennsylvania has some of the greatest shale oil in the world. So it's a huge issue there in terms of jobs and the economy there of Western Pennsylvania, obviously critical in this election. So now she supports fracking. Israel, she was always one of the more pro-Palestinian members of the Senate. But as soon as she becomes the presumptive nominee, then she claims she's all for Israel and we're going to back them 100%. And then she had that private meeting with Netanyahu. But he kind of threw her under the figurative bus, if you will, after that meeting because he made the statement that, well, he wasn't that impressed and not 100% sure where she's coming from. So there's issue two. Then the single payer on healthcare, which is the government. Remember, she wants to originally, she wanted to outlaw private health insurance.
Right. Now
she's changed her position on that after becoming the presumptive and now official nominee. She was for defunding the police. Oh, not anymore. And she made comments before, and these are on film, Stephen. And it's being run in Senate campaigns now, at least in Pennsylvania and Arizona, two that I've seen, where they have her on film saying that, yes, that we have to look at alternative ways to fight crime. That people who think that adding police officers to stop crime is backwards thinking. But now, of course, she doesn't want to defund the police. And most important of all, she was appointed border czar by Biden. They produced a document even. They made a big deal about putting her in charge of the border early on. Then it gets out of control. She, of course, did nothing. And even the border people say she did nothing. She didn't even talk to them, the border control agents. And now, of course, she's saying that she was never in charge of the border. I mean, can you really survive for the next 13 weeks with a litany like that of changing all these positions? And we know what her true positions are. They were what she truthfully said before she made all these changes. It's hard to believe that she could change her fundamental positions and outlook on all these issues, this list of issues, just because now she's the nominee and knows that her positions are too far to the left to win a national election. And Trump has to bring her back and make everybody understand this is what happens or is happening. And I think he is doing that.
Yes, oh, I hope so. That's a great summary there. Yeah, it's Trump really has to drive the narrative forward, that he can't let this campaign, as you say, it's a campaign built on lies, Harris Walls,
Yes.
and it's just one fabrication after another. Again, this just underscores the importance of the Catholic vote, an educated Catholic vote. You know, as Catholics, we serve truth
Yes.
himself, Jesus Christ, and who, you know, a campaign built on lies is the complete opposite of that. So, boy, yeah, I really hope that that Trump gets it out there. I know obviously the mainstream media, the establishment media, they're totally in the pocket of the left, and so they're
Yes.
as a propaganda machine. But yeah, hopefully Trump can I don't know, get around that basically. And at the end of the day, truth always wins, but I hope it wins on November 5th. We shall see.
Yes.
That's a wealth of information. Thank you so much for joining us again today.
Thank you.
All right. And I'm your host, Stephen Wynn. We will return on Monday with In Depth. God bless you.